at wildlife, and I decided to pull the bus over, and I busted out our huge spotting scope, took the kids out, and I aimed it up at a speck of animal life up in the field there. And as I zoomed in, I saw it was this bear. I could just see the back and the shoulders sticking up out of the tall grass. And I said, you guys, we got a bear here, okay? So just focus, and we'll journal about this later, because you're always journaling with kids. And I told them to line up, and I had them get ready, and the first girl in line, let's call her Sally today for this story, Sally steps up and puts her eye to the lens and just immediately lets out this blood-curdling shriek and explodes into tears. And I'm standing there bewildered, like, what, as she runs off to the other instructor, and I grab the scope and I look and I see, yeah, again, it's just this furry back and these big shoulders of this grizzly bear. And I'm staring, and then suddenly the head comes up, and with it, it's dragging the entrails of some animal that it's feasting on. And I'm staring at this face that's just a mess of blood and gore, and whatever it's chewing on is hanging out of its jaws like a nightmare. And I thought, I can't keep this from the kids. So I gave it back, I gave the scope back to them, and I let them have their fill of this like real life nature documentary. And even Sally, after she calmed down, she took a second look and she admitted that was actually pretty cool. And so, that same group, we thought we'd seen it all. That same group, a few days later, we went up into, on a nice long hike. We were up there for a few hours, and we decided to stop and have some lunch. And I was gulping down like another double-decker PB&J sandwich. And I was just enjoying my sandwich when I hear Sally's voice say, "Oh my gosh, there's a bear." And I was like, "Ha, Sally, that's really funny." And when I saw her face, I stopped, and I followed her gaze up the trail, and there was this massive bear, looked just like the one we had seen earlier, but with less blood. It was coming down the trail towards us. It wasn't more than 50 feet away, and it was just single-handedly flipping over boulders that were the size of these 10-year-old kids that I was with, and it was eating insects underneath them, and the whole group just fell completely silent. And I had to do something. So I stood up, I told the kids to stand up too, and I said, okay, just leave your lunches, ditch your sandwiches, and everyone kind of get behind me and back up off the trail, and we'll back up away. And I started fumbling with my can of pepper spray, and I ripped off the safety for the first time in my life. And in that moment, I just completely froze. And I felt that helplessness and that vulnerability, but it wasn't because of my injured eyes this time. It was because I was responsible for 15 young children and their lives miles up in the wilderness with this impossibly small can of pepper spray as our only form of defense. And I just, in that moment, I didn't know what to do. I had to go back to my training, and I thought of Bear Safety 101. What are the steps? Okay, leave your pack. All right, check. Don't run for now, check. And make a lot of noise. And I was like, wait a minute, that is something that these kids can do. And I turned to them and I said, there was a great big moose. And unbelievably, a few of them repeated me. And he liked to drink a lot of juice. I got right back into it. Kids came in full volume, and the bear, now 30 feet away, stops and looks at us. And every time the kids hit him with that chorus of voices, it was as though he lost a little bit of his confidence. And I felt like I gained a little bit of mine. I raised the pepper spray up. We hit him with another verse. We hit him with another verse. And then the bear turned. And the bear left the trail and crashed off into the forest. And the kids behind me, they stopped singing and they started cheering. And I turned around to see 15 of the happiest faces I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, we had just vanquished a bear using nothing but the power of song. It was, yeah, it was pretty much the best triumph we could have asked for. And as I was walking back to the bus with that group later that afternoon, I was filled with this overwhelming sense of gratitude, you know, and it wasn't gratitude because we hadn't been eaten by a bear. It was more that I was just grateful that these kids, they had my back in the time when I was starting to freak out and I needed help. I realized in that moment they proved that I felt much stronger with people behind me. And I never actually told those kids about my vision issue. You know, I kept that to myself for most of the time, but my experiences with them made me want to share it with other people in my life. And I started to realize all the people who have had my back for all these years. I mean, some of my best friends met me for the first time when I, as a stranger, approached them and said, "Can you help me navigate these dark stairs? Or can you get me across this dimly lit parking lot?" And these strangers always came through. And the strangers didn't always just turn into just friends. You know, to this day, I'm convinced that the reason I was able to be in any way charming and not panic when I met my fiance for the first time was because it was completely dark. It was pitch black, and I couldn't be intimidated by how incredibly beautiful she is because I couldn't see her. And I think that having a really badass grizzly bear story didn't hurt either. So thank you.
It's the middle of the 1980s when I arrive at college. Marquette is a Jesuit Catholic university located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And my first event is my freshman dorm orientation. And the resident RA gathers all the guys around. It's an all-male dorm. And he introduces himself and he says he's got a joke to help us relax and to break the ice a little bit. And he's like, "You guys know what gay stands for, right? Got AIDS yet?" He was right. You know, the ice was broken. Everyone's laughing, including me, because I'm just thinking, oh man, I've been in the closet for 18 years. You know, I guess I can do another 4 more. It's not going to kill me. But by second semester, I started getting this reputation that nobody in college wants. I'm known as a good listener. And it's only because that I have nothing to add to the conversation, which is all about my friends' burgeoning love lives, you know? And since I lack one, I become this repository for all of their dating details. And by Valentine's Day, I really was like, oh, you know, I just felt like I needed to take a risk and to do something. So what I do is I go into my dorm room, I lock the door, and I did the 1980s version of Googling something, which is to dial 411, the number for information. And a woman answers, and my throat just goes bone dry. I mean, I'd never come out of the closet to anyone, not even some voice, you know, on the phone. It's the 1980s. You just didn't do that kind of. It wasn't a thing yet, you know. The thinking was like, you know, if you're not caught red-handed being gay, why would you just, you know, turn yourself in? So I just hung up the phone. But I didn't have the information I needed. And so I paced the room, and I summoned my nerve. I call back. She answers again. It sounds like the same lady, maybe just a little more annoyed. And I'm able to get out, like, is there a way that you might tell me the name and address of a gay bar? And there's just this silence. And I'm sure she's going to hang up. But mercifully, she just mumbles this name and address, and then she hangs up, And that very night, I am standing in the freezing cold industrial south side of Milwaukee, and I'm just staring at this really dimly lit door. There's no name on it, and the numbers are kind of peeling off, and I'm thinking to myself, how can this dump possibly be a gay bar named C'est La Vie? And I walk in, and there's a handful of mostly older men there, and they're standing around drinking and smoking and pretending really badly to ignore each other. And I think, well, why don't I join them? My people, all 10 of us. I'm sitting there, and after a while, I just realized that, it's not going to be the night where I'm going to meet the love of my life. That is, until the door opens, and this other guy comes in. And I was just so relieved. I remember thinking, man, I did not know gay men could look like that. I mean, this guy, above the neck, he looked like a young Kennedy. He had this square jaw and this cleft chin and these really intelligent blue eyes and this windswept blonde hair, like he'd been sailing or canvassing. But below the neck, he was just all blue-collar realness. I mean, he had on a factory uniform, with these chunky work boots, and he had this work shirt on with his, sleeves rolled past these Popeye-like forearms, and no coat. And listen, no coat in February in Milwaukee is really saying something. And what it said to me was that he probably had a car. And he obviously had a job, and maybe he had a place to go back to. And so he walks over to the bar, and I think there's going to be a stampede to get next to him, but there isn't, so I do. I go stand next to him, and he orders a whiskey, so I order a whiskey, which I hate, but who cares? And eventually, our elbows make contact, and he doesn't pull away, and I don't pull away. So there's this moment that there's this warmth building between us, and I think, let me just try something here. And so I moved my elbow slightly, and when he moved his in response, it was just like the best male conversation I never had. I mean, to me, it was like a relationship, being that close to an actual handsome gay guy, and I was so close to him that I noticed this wonderful smell, and I thought it was mistaken at first, but there is no mistaking the iconic smell of chocolate. I mean, in a bar that just reeked of chain smoking and too much Stetson, this guy smelled of chocolate, and it made him seem familiar, almost like approachable. And I wanted to say something to him, but all I could think of to say was is that you that smells like cookies? Which is so weird, and I'm so glad I didn't say that. But I did smile, and he just gives me this look that was pure confidence. There was just nothing extra in it, He looked like a guy who knew what he wanted to be doing. And what he does is he orders another round. And it comes, and picks him up, and he turns around, and he looks at me, and he walks away. And in the bar mirror, I see him give what I thought was going to be my drink to some other guy in a brewer's cap, and they chat for a while, and they leave together. I was pretty disappointed, but I thought, all right, I'm going to go back. I go back the next weekend. He's there, and I'll be damned if the exact same thing doesn't happen. And the weekend after that, and so on, for I don't know how many weekends. And the only thing that's different is that he just gets faster, and more efficient at picking guys that aren't me and leaving with them, And so during this whole series of rejections, I get to know the bartender, as you do in those situations. And I said to him, what is the deal with that factory guy? And he's like, oh, is he your type? And I'm like, yeah, he's my type. And he's like, oh, well, we call him E.T. I was like, E.T.? And he was like, everyone's type, honey, not just yours. And then he proceeds to tell me that the factory guy's type is actually dark and skinny, like the bartender. And I had to admit, I did kind of notice that. So I think, well, okay, if I'm not going to be with the factory guy yet, maybe I can kind of be like him a little bit, at least copy his style. I can be hot like him a little bit. So I think, well, what I'll do is I'll start with the shoes. I went back to campus and I bought these chunky work boots at the Army-Navy surplus store. They kind of slowed down the way I walked and made my walk more of a lumber. And I bought these tight work shirts, and because the factory guy was muscular, I started working out. And even my friends noticed a difference. And when one of them was like, like, you're not such a good listener anymore. And I knew I was getting somewhere, A couple months later, I get a buzz on campus, and I think, let me just go to C'est La Vie. So I went to C'est La Vie, and I have to say, the first time I was feeling kind of hot, let's say warm. And I go in, and the factory guy is in the corner, and he's drinking alone, but he looks somehow different. And I think it's that he's drunker than I'd ever seen him. But, like most really handsome people, it only suits him, So I turn to the bar, and I order 2 whiskeys, because that's going to be our drink. And I'm feeling like, maybe I wasn't ready before. It was just that as easy as that. There's something fateful about this night. And I pick up the whiskeys, and I turn around just in time to see the factory guy do something I'd never seen him do before, which is to leave alone, And I just wanted to take those 2 whiskeys and chuck them at the closing door. I mean, to him, I wasn't even better than nothing. I wasn't even like consolation prize material. So I drank the 2 whiskeys, which I was acquiring a taste for by then, and I left C'est La Vie, and I never went back. And college ended, the 1980s ended, and I got my ass out of the closet, and I took my slightly better body, and I moved to New York City, and I got a job teaching English as a second language in Washington Heights. And I had an apartment and friends and roommates and even my first serious boyfriend. And I'm teaching one day, and what I did was I tried to expand my students' vocabulary and comprehension by using the TV. We'd watch current events and get new vocabulary that's ripped from the headlines, It's exciting. So we were watching the TV doing this, and there is this news bulletin that breaks out of Milwaukee, and it shows this guy, and he's got his hands behind his back, and he's doing this perp walk, and there is this close-up on his face, and I'm like, that's him. That's the factory guy. And, it's not every day that you see an ex-crush get arrested. It's not like I was proud of it or anything, but I was a little bit excited. So in my class, I'm like, I know him. I know that guy. And then I had to sit down because of what they showed next, which was, it was a hazmat team in gas masks, and they were hoisting these blue 57-gallon drums down some steps. And the drums were later said to contain acid and the undissolvable remains of Jeffrey Dahmer's love life. My students struggled to comprehend this story. I mean, everyone knew the term serial killer, but other words escaped them like rohypnol and stench. And the words with cognates, they just got right away, like dismemberment and decapitation. But the word that just brought the silence down and this chill in the classroom was cannibalism. And 11 of Jeffrey Dahmer's 17 victims spent their last unimaginable moments of their lives in room 213 of the Oxford apartment building, just a short drive up Wisconsin Avenue from C'est La Vie. They were all young men of color. They were his type, as the bartender had informed me. And I was just feeling nauseous and just confused, trying to take in this information. I stand up and I turned off the TV and I just canceled class, and I decided I'm going to walk all the way home to Chelsea. It'd take me 2 hours, but I had to sweat something out of me, I felt so confused by what I'd heard. And so I'm walking along, and I thought, I'm trying to keep down the details of this story, which just kind of keep rising up. And one of them was that I was right. He did smell of chocolate, and it was because he put in these long hours at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory in downtown Milwaukee. And so I make my way all the way to the Columbia campus, and it's so hot. But mostly my feet are hot, and I noticed that I'm wearing those boots that I bought in Milwaukee 6 years earlier, the ones I bought to make myself more rugged like him, and they are slowing me down, these boots, and I don't want to be slowed down, because every time I'm slowed down, I just think of how I yearned, not just for Jeffrey Dahmer's attention, but specifically for an invitation to get in his car and to go to that apartment. I was sure at that apartment that he would jumpstart my love life, but he didn't choose me. And it might sound callous, but unlike any of his 17 victims, I was alive and living in New York City and young, and I was filled with ambition and passion and all sorts of ideas about the kind of man that I wanted to be. And my first idea was just to go right away to a sporting goods store. And I went and I walked in and I bought the first pair of white sneakers and I put them on and I laced them up and I paid and I left and I took the laces of those boots, I tied them together and I just chucked them into the first garbage can I could find. And with each block that I passed, I just left them further and further behind. Thank you.